So, good morning to you all. Welcome to the first multiplier event of the Erasmus for All project. I'm Ana Reis. I will be with you throughout this morning. And before proceeding to the official opening ceremony of our event, please allow me just a minute to provide some technical information. This event is being recorded and photographed. So in case you prefer not to be included, kindly inform our staff in the room, or in case of those that are following us online, please turn off your camera. Slido is available for interaction with the audience. Should you wish to address any question to our speakers, please use the QR code you are seeing on the screen, or type #ErasmusForAll. This at slido.com. Our speakers will attempt to provide an answer to all questions, either orally or in writing. And without any further delay, I would invite Professor Joana Carvalho, our Vice-Rector for International Relations, Social Responsibility and Sports, to address a few welcoming words.
Hello, everyone. So I will read my speech. I think it's better. Otherwise, I will talk. So you will see I will talk a lot. So better like that. So dear representatives of the European Commission and the Portuguese Erasmus Plus National Agency Education and Training, dear colleagues from partner institutions, dear students, dear guests, both in the room and those that are joining us online. Warm greetings to you all, and welcome to Erasmus for All multiplier event. On behalf of our partnership, I would like to thank you all for joining us today and for sharing with us the concern and the commitment to achieve an even more inclusive Erasmus Plus program. We are opening our doors today to share with you some of the most relevant conclusions of the work that has been carried out so far within the scope of this promising project. Also, we wish to bring this central topic into a broader discussion by a wide variety of stakeholders that have a relevant word to say concerning students' mobility and Erasmus Plus scholarships. We are excited to share the insights, and I can foresee enriching views and discussion through the sessions. I must tell you that I am very proud of this initiative that the University of Porto has the honor to coordinate in straight collaboration with an excellent team of partners from different parts of Europe, and that allowed the project to benefit from diverse and totally complementary profiles, know-how, and experiences. Together, we are struggling to produce a positive impact in the Erasmus Plus program and consequently in the future of many young Europeans. It is well known from several different studies carried out in recent years that the international experiences, as the one offered by the Erasmus Plus program, generates clear benefits to the participants. Through Erasmus for All, we are working to increase this number and to allow more people to participate regardless of their conditions. After all, isn't inclusion one of the Europeans' pillars? We also know that these unique lived experiences shape the feeling of belonging to the European Union too, and a sense of union and peace that turn out to be crucial towards the global understanding of nations and of course, particularly in the context as unfortunately we are living nowadays that we are perceiving in this old continent. We strongly believe that our work will have much to contribute to these causes and may have a great impact in the European society. So let's work for an Erasmus real for all. And of course, once again, thank you very much for your interest, and I hope you can enjoy our event and of course our university and our beautiful city, even with rain. I hope it will finish soon. So thank you very much and enjoy it.
Thank you very much, Professor Joana, for these welcome and inspiring words. I now invite Luísa Capitão to take the floor. Luísa is the Director of the International Office of the Rectorate of the University of Porto and the Erasmus for All Project Coordinator.
Thank you, Joana. Thank you, Professor Joana. Good morning, and again, a warm welcome to all of you. I would like to introduce you to our Erasmus for All project in a few minutes. So this project was funded by the Portuguese Erasmus National Agency as a key action to cooperation partnership of the Erasmus program. So what's its story? As all good stories, it starts with once upon a time, there was a group of active European universities and organizations that were highly experienced in student mobility and strongly committed to foster and broaden more inclusive participation in this extraordinary program as it is Erasmus. Indeed, after these 35 years, Erasmus is one of the biggest success stories in Europe, and it may claim that is more inclusive than ever. However, all studies and publications are coherent, highlighting that there are still a significant number of obstacles faced by students that wish to partake in a mobility period abroad, making student participation in mobility exchange to remain low. I would like to ask for your participation in identifying what is, in your opinion, the most often mentioned reason by students not to undertake a study period abroad. So we have created a page in Slido to which you may access by scanning the QR code you may see in the screen or by accessing slido.com and typing hashtag Erasmus for all. Let's see. Okay. Let's take a few moments for you to access and to choose. Okay. Still low participation, 36. More or less like the mobility still remains low. Let's do something about it. Okay, so we are seeing something that is not quite a surprise. I would say that maybe a bigger surprise is that in this room or in this event, in this room and virtually, almost 85% of the persons voted for the option of expected financial burden. And in fact, as you can see, 60% of the students not planning to enroll abroad point out expected financial burden as an obstacle, so economic reasons. And so this brings us back to our story. Remember, trying to write this story. Considering the weight of the economic reasons as a cause of students' exclusion from the Erasmus program, this group of organizations, of universities, organizations, stakeholders, wanted to tackle these low levels of higher education student participation in Erasmus. And so how do we intend to do that? Well, from 2021 up to 2024, these organizations this partnership will work to propose a more economically viable scholarship scheme that will allow HE students to spend part of their studies abroad in any of the program countries. So allow all students that wish to do so. The Erasmus for All project will cover 4 main stages, which will result in concrete outputs that are expected to contribute to reducing the existing asymmetry in the EU and to promote even more fairness, inclusion, and equity of mobility grants between individuals and among this EU economic diversity that we have. So, what have we reached so far? Chapter 1 of this story was dedicated to map and learn more about the Erasmus Plus program and other funded programs. So to get more about other projects, other similar stories of other groups of organizations that also looked at this issue and done something about it, or at least they tried. And also to gather detailed feedback of core stakeholders of these stories, students and universities, allowing them to be the co-creators of an improved program. The Erasmus for All partnership organized student social labs with students from all over Europe to hear their voices directly, what they have to say. It was also invited to be present at the Campus of European Universities event in Versailles that happened last June, through which it was also possible to get first-hand information about the vision of European universities on students' mobility and inclusion. All European universities have so demanding KPIs, key performance indicators on mobility. So all of this resulted in relevant and exclusive information that is now gathered in the mapping and research report, which will be soon available in the project's official website and the Erasmus Plus project's results platform. So the first chapter of this story is coming to an end and leading the way to the chapter number 2, another chapter which will be dedicated to developing proposals for alternative grant calculation formulas. Quite difficult. A group of experts of different and complementary scientific fields from the partner universities will be joining efforts to develop such formulas. The results will originate the guidelines for a more inclusive grant calculation formula, which will again be made available to the public, shared with all of you. With the new formulas defined, we hope, partner universities will pilot the proposed alternatives with different groups of students and keeping a control group that will allow for a comparison of results. So these mobility flows are expected to occur more or less within a year by September 2023, and the partnership will monitor their experiences and results and ultimately elaborate the Erasmus for All impact study, which will be published openly in the same platforms. And our story, well, as all good stories, I would say, will come to an end through the last chapter that will focus on targeting policy and decision makers for an increased awareness on the benefits of these new methodologies. The final publication of the project will be the Erasmus for All policy paper, recommendations towards a more social and economically inclusive Erasmus scholarship. So it will be more or less by the occasion of the intermediate review of the program. And so overall, this project is expected to contribute to increase the number of students that may have this outstanding Erasmus life-changing experience. And to get to this happy ending, today we invite you all to write this story with us. Let's do it together. I would borrowing some inspiration from Alexandre Dumas on the Three Musketeers. Let's go, all for Erasmus to reach and Erasmus for all. So this is the official website. where you may follow all the news and all the activities and results, accomplishments, and stay tuned. And thank you so much for being here, for your attention, and for writing this story with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luísa, for offering such clear insights of the Erasmus for All project. Now I would like to invite you to listen to our three next speakers who will share their views and some of the data that resulted from the first phase of our project as an answer to the question, can the Erasmus Plus program really be for all? Each of them represents a particular dimension of this issue. So we'll start with Carle Bonafous-Murat, Senior Liaison Officer, France Universités, President of the French Erasmus Network and former President of Sorbonne Nouvelle University. He will provide a more political view on the topic.
Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here with all of you. And thank you to Anna and her team and to the presidential team of the University of Porto for inviting us and inviting me to attend this first multiplier event, which comes after a years-long work and before 2 more to go. I'd like to, as a kind of starting point, I'd like to say that it was pointed out a few seconds ago that what we're aiming at with the Erasmus for All project is the midterm review. Midterm review is an important step in European, programs, and the Erasmus Plus 2024 midterm review is no exception to the rule. And as a starting point, and in about the 10 minutes that have been allotted, I'd like to say something about the previous midterm review, the one that took place in 2016, as part of the start of the Erasmus Plus program. And one of the questions that was asked students was, with Erasmus Plus, has student mobility improved? And interestingly, about 26% of the students answered yes, fully. 36 answered yes, to some extent. And 32 answered no, not really, which means that taken together, 68% said, well, yes and no. So what are going to be the figures in 2024? We have to improve those figures. We have to move towards the left. We have to move towards the yes, fully answer. I think that's already a political aim that we should all work for in the years to come. But there were other instructive remarks, and Anna, you tell me when I have to stop. There were other instructive remarks which were made on the occasion of the last midterm review, and some of them have been gathered by rectors' conferences, such as France Universités, formerly called CPU, la Conférence des Présidents d'Université, and EUA, the European University Association, which brings together all those rectors' conferences. And there were interesting remarks made on that occasion. For instance, one of them, I think, gives us food for thought. The question was, what are the main obstacles to mobility? And well, clearly, the first answer was cost coverage was the main obstacle for participation. But as a continuation of this question, there was an additional one. Should the burden, the onus of cost coverage be placed on the students themselves or on the institutions? Which is an interesting one, I think. And the answer was, of course, 50-50, I would say. But there were people who said that Erasmus is something of a program that actually favors not all students. Okay, there is a relative problem with participation inclusiveness, but that favors some institutions at the expense of others because they have the means to cap, the loss or the deficit of funding with their own resources. And I think this is an interesting point that we should consider also today in the discussions we're having, because it is up to a point, I believe, true. So when we come to, going into detail, when we come to considering where universities are situated, in what part of a country, in a more urban area, in a more rural area, in a small-sized city, on a big-sized city, and so on and so forth, considerations which are really at the center of our debate, we should perhaps also think of this as, well, a possibility. Should we try and increase the funding of the institutions themselves so that they would be able to top up, the missing part? Okay, and what would be the amount needed depending on where the not the host university, but the universities from which the students leave are located. So that's something which I think is worth taking into account. The third point I'd like to make, or the second, I don't know, which is really more topical because it deals with today's situation. We know that we've got an instrument, a new instrument devised by the European Commission, and I'd like to greet representatives of the European Commission present today. There's a new instrument that we may make use of, which is the European Universities Initiative. We know that by bringing together several universities, several institutions together, well, of course, the European Commission has made each of them stronger in a way, because, joining forces for cooperation, for transnational cooperation, as the 2022 communication was entitled, joining forces for that cooperation is essential. But now the target, which has been set by the European Commission as regards mobility for the students of a particular universities alliance, is 50%. This is huge. This is exceptionally huge. This is ambitious. So how can we rise to that ambition? It will take time, of course, but we have to bear this in mind, and we have to try and assess the various kinds of mobility which have developed and which, of course, were brought to the fore by the COVID crisis. We all know that, including virtual mobility. And I know that Joao, who's listening to us, is certainly not pleased with me for using that phrase. So perhaps, Joao, I'll call it internationalization at home, if you feel that's better. But the virtual mobility offering, the internationalization at home option, how can we take this into account without losing what is certainly central to mobility, that is the cultural experience of going abroad, the discovery of a new country, of a new culture, of new friends, that is what we might call campus life. Campus life. Can campus life be part of student mobility online? That is certainly to be doubted, but we'll leave it for the forthcoming debate to say whether it's possible or not. So these are the first 3 points I wanted to make at the onset of this meeting. And again, thank you to the University of Porto, and I look forward to having fruitful debate with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Carle. Once again, that's definitely a lot of food for thought. We will then hear Ricardo Biscaia, professor and researcher in the field of economics, higher education, among other fields, and one of the members of the multidisciplinary group of academics that will develop the alternative grant calculation formulas. He will provide university's view on this issue.
Hi, good morning. So let me just try this. Okay, then it works. So well, since this is a very short time frame for us to resume all of the results that we had in the PR1, I just wanted to make a few topics, bring out a few topics so that we can fuel the discussion afterwards. And so I prepared this very little presentation about some of the things that we accomplished from PR1 and that we will bring to the design of the more inclusive grant scheme on PR2. So let me, okay. I wanted to bring a few points, and the first is the concept of disadvantaged students. There is no consensus on what is the concept for disadvantaged student that we should use. We could focus primarily on income if, just as Luísa presented before, if the majority of the students is not coming due to financial burden, then being more inclusive or attending to the needs of the disadvantaged students would be looking at their income and bringing grants according to their income. But then there are other sources of disadvantages, and then we addressed them before. So students could be taking a job, and so doing mobility would imply losing the job, and that's some important disadvantage when looking at mobility. Some students are already dislocated from their parents' home, and so is this an important issue to take account for when thinking about disadvantaged students. And then disadvantages per se, such as mobility disadvantages or mental health impairments. So some other sort of disadvantages, characteristics that we could be looking at. And so when we are crafting the grant, we should think of one of these two options. Should we try to make a typology of disadvantaged students and then maybe create exclusive funding lines or exclusive grants that only these disadvantaged students could have access to? Or should we keep the current practice, which is the top-ups, and then applying top-ups if the students are falling into these different disadvantageous situations? So this is just a part of the discussion that we've been having and extracting from PR1, the concept of disadvantaged students and how should we use it and what should we do to tackle these disadvantages. So this is one of the first things I wanted to bring. From our student social labs, what I wanted to mention here is the concept of uncertainty, and how uncertainty, that what I mean is money could be not the only thing that could be keeping students from going. Maybe there's some uncertainties play a role. So if students are, for instance, unaware of the prices that they will pay when they arrive at the destination country. What if they don't know exactly the amount of the grant that they receive from so they know it's a range between X and Y, but they don't know exactly if they'll be closer to Y or through X. And so there's also uncertainty on the amount of funding received. There's also uncertainty on when they will receive their money. And so maybe mobility students will have to advance some money beforehand, for instance, to make housing deposits when they go there. And this means that if the student is from a disadvantaged background, probably you will not want these uncertainties when he's applying for a mobility grant. And so our grant proposal could also look for establish more certainty to the candidates, so they know exactly what they will expect from the Erasmus, from their Erasmus experience, and about the funding burdens that they will have. And when Luísa presented the slide about the main reason for not going, I noticed that there was the expected financial burden, exactly because we don't know the exact financial burden. And so anything that the university or the grant system could do to reduce these uncertainties will help more the disadvantaged students compared to the students that are already going. So the last bullet point, this result calls for a more transparent, simpler grant with predictable payment schedules, with more exchange of information regarding living costs in destination countries. So it's something of course, some of this is extra grant, but it's also important for students to help students in their decisions of going to mobility. Accommodation is also viewed as the biggest cost, of course, and accommodation brings, it also relates with the uncertainty we were talking before, because students will have to search in the housing market for these houses, and they will not know exactly how much they will cost. And since this is accounted or reported to be 1/3 of total expenses, this is actually the biggest cost that they face. This calls for two things that we will try to account in our grant experiences. The first one, maybe the grant specification could be more city-based instead of country-based. So I actually have, as you all know, 3 groups of countries from which the funding grant depends. And country level, well, even this high, medium, low income is not sufficient already, but country level could also be not sufficient if we have housing markets that are very diverse across the European area, especially the differences between capitals and non-capitals, but even this is not thin enough to capture all the differences. And so the granting scheme could be looking more at city-based destination costs instead of a more general country or high-income country-based. And also from the suggestion of other members in the expert group, we could also try and assess if institutions themselves could be able to provide part of the accommodation to make the student, to avoid having the student going to the uncertain housing market. So if somehow part of the grant could be already included as some sort of accommodation that the university can make available to the students, this would also be a safer route for students to go and also eliminate some important share of their costs and also uncertainties related to the trip. So accommodation being the biggest cost raises some questions regarding the grant that we can try and tackle directly. And so this is the final wrap-up slide. So PR2, we in the group of experts will try and craft scenarios to be experimented later on. And these are some of the main goals that I extracted from these slides. So testing whether all this information needed to identify disadvantaged students or to identify the top-ups that are given to these students can be easily gathered by institutions. So it should not be, institutions should not face a terrible time by trying to identify what are the students' characteristics. So the characteristics we'll be looking at should be easy to identify and to validate, and well, that's it. So we will test also if institutions can make the funding more predictable and paid in due time, so that the students don't have to advance money for some, like I said before, housing deposits or other funding that has to be advanced. Testing methods, reliable methods to assess city-based costs instead of having just 3 groups of countries to determine the grants. Testing whether in-kind supplements of, for instance, accommodation can be something that universities could offer in the short term, or at least provide some destinations that would offer these type of in-kind supplements for it to be included in the grant directly. And of course, in the end, we will want to test if more disadvantaged students have, depending on the definition that we'll use, more disadvantaged students will have joined these mobility programs after we craft these grants. And yeah, that's the intervention I wanted to bring. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ricardo, for this data and also for anticipating a little bit the work ahead. And last but not least, we will listen to Katrīna Sproģe, Vice President of the European Students' Union, and who will give an answer to this question from the students' perspective. Katrīna will be joining us online. So,
hi, good morning. Do you hear me okay? Or you don't hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, we can listen to you.
Okay.
Good
great.
morning.
Hi, good morning. Yes, I'm very sorry I cannot be with you in person in Porto right now. We are having our General Assembly in very, very foggy Prague. But nonetheless, about the student perspective on Erasmus and the benefits, and listening to the previous presentations, it's
Katrīna, sorry to interrupt. We are having a small technical issue here because we can listen to you but not see yet. Okay, now we do. Perfect. Sorry to interrupt. Go
No,
ahead,
no.
please.
Yes, and it's quite clear that we are on a very similar page, if not the same page, about the issues, and the intervention I'm going to be having is more about complementing and showing why we need to support especially students from marginalized groups and how they benefit from the program, or how they are how they're not included within the current system, and especially finance wise. You should be seeing my screen right now. Yes.
It's
So,
fine, yeah.
shortly about the opportunities and the challenges students face when going on mobility or choosing not to go on a mobility program. This is data from very recently published CM project conducted by Erasmus Student Network, who focus on social inclusion within the mobility programs. And I think this is extremely fitting for the purpose right now today, for the event, and how the mobility programs impact the students who have had the opportunity and the privilege to participate. And as you can see, there is significant increase in understanding global world and multicultural understandings. They do change their career plans rather often, and are more motivated and learn the languages. And actually, as the data shows, they are earning better grades after the mobility periods, and are more likely to continue their studies. And what is interesting within this data is how marginalized groups, those can be students from either low-income families, first-generation students, students with disabilities, and so on, that they report that these benefits are more often occurring after their mobility period than their more privileged peers. And even though the non-mobile students, those who haven't had the opportunity to participate, they also recognize all the positive impacts of the mobility period, especially credit mobility. And they see how that could benefit their personal development, employment, academic achievements, but all the barriers that they are facing, they are not able to reach these goals and benefit from everything that this could give. And I think it's more important now to focus on the obstacles that already have been mentioned to a very large extent. And it is no denying that the financial burden is first and foremost reason, both for students who are planning to go abroad and for those who choose not to go because of this financial burden. And this is why the whole project exists, and it's and in the future looking form, it's very important to see how we can change this. However, along different obstacles, as well as during the first presentation, there was separation from children and the loss of paid job, which also influences and corresponds to wherever we look for data. Those are the biggest reasons that we are seeing as reasons not to go. And to add on to this, to to maybe a project at different time is the there's not much we can do for the emotional reasons not to go, which could be the separation from children, or losing the social networks at home. For example, the recognition of the study results abroad, that has been still remains one of the bigger issues, and that is something that maybe universities can also look into, and how to solve that, as that can lead to academic debts, and then increased degree program time-wise, which also adds on top of the financial burden the students might face. And a lot of these obstacles are very much interlinked to one another, and how they supplement each other in a very negative way. And the same way as for the benefits of the program, it's also for the obstacles and barriers, where marginalized groups and students from those groups do report also a lot more often that these barriers are more prominent. And the same was mentioned in the previous presentation. We don't really have full understanding on how we can say what this is, and how we can establish the base of which groups are those going to be. And but yes, these are the issues that we are seeing and facing. And as also data shows, all the practical and institutional barriers and problems are those that are more occurrent and more significant than those connected to environment or attitude, or their loneliness or motivation. And maybe food for thought as well is not just seeing how the grant should be accommodated to the city, or to the top-ups that needed for different groups of students. Right now, we are facing a huge energy crisis and the inflation, and how the Erasmus grant can live up to it, and how the financial support can continue to be sufficient for the students' needs to be able to afford to go abroad. And of course, the non-mobile students also always report the insufficient funding as the main barrier, both actually for degree and for credit mobilities, regardless of the time needed to go abroad for. Yes, I don't want to dwell on the bad, but rather, if there are any questions, then answer them, and then engage in discussion with the participants online or in person on what can be done to overcome these obstacles and support everyone in a more inclusive education.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you very much, Katrīna. Since we are a little bit behind the schedule, I would invite now Svava from the European Commission to tell us a little bit about how the program has evolved in terms of prioritizing inclusion, and what steps are being taken to make Erasmus truly for all. And then we will resume all the discussion next to the roundtable, because I think it will be the right time to bring all these issues that were raised and all the data that you have also shown. Thank you very much, Katrīna, once again. So now I kindly invite Svava Finsen, a policy officer of the Directorate General Education, Youth, Sport and Culture of the European Commission.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Right.
Just again, another moment for allowing us to see you as well. So,
All right.
Okay, coming to it. We
Mhm.
just see this gray bar again.
Yes,
Okay.
it should be gone, right? Are we there? Does it work?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Wait a minute, let me see. Well, no. Okay.
Actually, it was already in the presentation mode and now it returned to
It
the
returned
editing
back.
mode.
Okay. Wait a minute, let me just share again. Just one moment. I know we tested it yesterday, but there's always something.
It's part of it.
Yes, I think so.
It's okay, perfect.
You see the correct screen and everything,
Yes.
no gray bars. All right, that's
Yes,
perfect.
it's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, then thanks for having me. I'm very happy to be here and speaking to you at this event. I will talk a little bit about the steps we are doing in the Erasmus program to make the program more inclusive. Does it move for you, the screen, or no? The slides, there we go. Sorry about that. I think to describe what we're doing, we'll start at the beginning, at the basics. And I will just mention that for us in the Erasmus program for the 2021 to 2027 program, inclusion is really at the heart of the program. It is one of the 4 horizontal priorities. We want to make the program more digital, more green, more civically engaged, and more inclusive. But it's not just for the Erasmus program that we are thinking about making higher education more inclusive. This is also a part of the European Strategy for Universities that was published earlier this year and endorsed by the EU member states in April. And in this strategy, we have these 4 key objectives. And you can see there that the circles that I highlighted, that inclusion is really a part of the strategy. So the strategy is not for the Erasmus program, but rather for higher education and in the EU more generally. You see it's a focus there in the first key objective of strengthening the European dimension in higher education and research, but also as a part of key objective number 2, which is consolidating universities as lighthouses of our European way of life. There we want to focus on fostering diversity, inclusiveness, and gender equality, and to have institutions make these changes that are needed for universities to become these places of truly equal opportunities. So you see, inclusion is at the heart of the Erasmus program, but also when it comes to our policies and the Commission for Higher Education in general. We also are focusing on this multifaceted inclusion. And what we mean by this is that we are also focusing on different types of institution. So we want to include all different types of higher education institutions. So this would be University of Applied Sciences, including also art schools, art academies, tertiary vet institutions or vocational education institution, private institutions. So we want to include everyone in this discussion. And we are also addressing inclusion in different ways, both through these financial mechanisms that we have, and also through a more diverse mobility opportunity offer, so more flexible mobility options. Let's go on. And for us to be able to achieve all this, we need to address inclusive mobility at the different levels. So we have the European policy level, the program design level, the NA level, and the higher education institutions themselves. At the policy level, we have various ways of keeping inclusion in mind. We have the Erasmus regulation, where we mentioned the definitions to barriers of entry, for example. We have an inclusion and diversity strategy. We have this framework of inclusion measures where we are committing in the Commission to keeping inclusion in mind throughout all our work on the program. We have designed the Erasmus Charter to include inclusion. And we've also recently launched this Salto Resource Center on Inclusion and Diversity, which is supposed to help national agencies and universities when it comes to developing inclusion strategies, for example. At the program design level, we made this design decision that I mentioned and the update to the financial instruments, and I will go over that in more detail. We also have the app, the Erasmus Plus app, that we're hoping will make the program more accessible to every student. And we have new monitoring guidelines on how to monitor the charter or compliance with the charter principles. At the NA level, we have inclusion officers. The NAs need also to create national inclusion plans and then need to report back to the Commission. The NAs are also critical when it comes to definition for the national criteria for the top of your opportunities. And there's also promotional activity and actually monitoring the ECHE principles. And at the higher education institution level, it's also very important. There we have the data collection on what the barriers are for each institution. We have the final reports where we learn from the institution how the situation is in their institution. And I think most important is also this outreach and promotion that we trust to the higher education institutions themselves. So for us to achieve this truly inclusive program, we need all these different actors to work together to achieve it. Then I thought I would go over the old program a little bit and show you some statistics from the past program, so from 2014 to 2020. I'm showing you here this percentage of the total number of student mobilities for traineeships and student mobilities for studies that came from disadvantaged background. So in the old program, we had this top up for students from disadvantaged background. And you can see already the numbers are not very high in the old program, 4.1% of traineeship students receiving this support and 8% of student going on study mobility. But I also wanted to highlight that after the mobilities, 85% of participants between the years 2014 and 2018, they agreed that the Erasmus mobility they went on made them more committed to inclusion of disadvantaged people in the future. So going on this Erasmus mobility encouraged them to keep inclusion in mind after the mobilities themselves. This here is just to show you the trend. We saw that there was a higher percentage of students receiving this top up, but then we see the decline in the 2019 call, which is the first call that was affected by the COVID pandemic. So it's partly explained by that, and we are also hoping to see this go up again. This graph is showing you the special needs support that we had in the old program, and we've replaced this terminology with inclusion support now. And the orange line there below is showing participants who received the special needs support. So also you see 210 participants, it's not a very high number. So we're really hoping that with these design decisions and financial support we have in the new program, we will reach a higher percentage. And we are also very aware of the importance of adequate grant levels. In the participant reports from the old program, we saw that around 60% of participants on student mobility between the years 2014 and 2018, they would not have gone on a mobility without the grant. And we see also to some extent the staff mobility also being affected by this, with around 24% saying that they would not have gone without the grant and around 50% being unsure. I wanted to share this slide with you as well. This is showing mobilities that were funded also by other grant sources, just to see from some context that there is a certain percentage of students that get funding from somewhere else. And you see there that the state or regional grants being the biggest part of that in 2018 to 2019, and then also grants from the sending institution. Just to show you a little bit from the past program. Also here, the average grant, since I know that you're focusing on grants and the funding for this project. This is the average grant for participating in student mobility for traineeships there on the left, and on the right we see participation in student mobility for studies. And this is for the whole mobility, but it's very similar, but you see the average duration is different, so the grant is higher for traineeships. And now for the future, the availability of Erasmus funds is growing. Already there we see in this slide from the past program, we started in 2021 slightly lower with less funding available. Also, we had during call 2021, we also had institutions that still had funding left from calls 2019 and 2020 due to COVID. But we already see in call 2022 that the grant amounts that are available are higher than in the past program. And this will continue to grow in the future. And we have heard some concerns from national agencies that they might even have problems with using all the funding. But what they can do then is increase the grant levels. Like I know that you've been discussing, institutions or the national agencies rather have the opportunity to set the grant levels on a range. And we saw already an increase between 2021 and 22 that some national agencies or 7 countries that increased the grant levels between 2021 and 22. And then I wanted also to add that there were 14 countries that added new groups to the national criteria for the top-up for fewer opportunities between the calls. And more are to be expected. And I think the actual final number was higher because we did this survey before the start of before the summer. Then I just want to briefly talk about the financial support. I'm sure most of the participants here are familiar, but I will nevertheless give you a quick summary. So for the financial support measures we are doing here for the program to increase inclusion is to offer more financial support for participants with fewer opportunities. So we have the top up for fewer opportunities and we have inclusion support. The top up is for students and recent graduates with fewer opportunities, and they can receive 250 euros per month for long-term mobilities. But this criteria is defined at the national level by national agencies and the national authorities. What I also wanted to highlight is that this can be combined with the traineeship top-up for long-term activities. So that is 150 euros per month. So if you are a participant with fewer opportunities going on a traineeship, then you can get both the top-up for fewer opportunities and the traineeship. And the top-up can also be combined with the inclusion support. And like I mentioned, inclusion support is this developed version of the special needs support, which is based on real costs, so 100% of the eligible costs for participants, similar to the old special needs supports also aimed at participants with physical, mental, or health-related conditions. But now we also have inclusion support for institutions. So this is a unit cost of 100 euros per participant that is receiving inclusion support, because we know for institution, it is a lot of work helping participants with fewer opportunities that need the inclusion support to go abroad. For example, if we have participants that have specific needs when it comes to accommodation, they need special accessibility to get into the institution itself. So we are trying to encourage the participation of institutions with this inclusion support. Other financial support that we are providing to help with inclusion in the program is having higher individual support for students from outermost regions and OCTs. We also have travel support for students and recent graduates with fewer opportunities who are going on short-term mobility. And we don't have an opt-out when it comes to students for fewer opportunities that are receiving travel support for international mobilities. So just to give you some idea of this financial support. This graph here is showing the estimation of the percentage of mobile students that are eligible for the top-up under Call 2021. So this is information from the national agencies where they were trying to estimate the uptake really of this top-up. And combining or comparing it with Call 2022, it's not super clear, but there is a general upwards trend that I am showing you here. So we're gradually moving towards the top-up, reaching more participants in each country. And this slide is just to give you some idea on how different the criteria for the top-up is. This was just an unofficial, informal survey we did with the national agencies to try to get some idea of how they are approaching this top-up, but we see that most NAs are giving the top-up to participants with disabilities, participants who are parents, foster parents or caregivers, or participants from a lower socioeconomic background. But you also see this is very specific to each country. So you can see some NAs that are focusing on participants from ethnic minorities, children of veterans, participants with salary from the state. So there's really this need for the national agencies to do research in their own countries to see where the top-up is best suited, like which groups really need this top-up to be able to participate in mobility. There is also this design decision that I mentioned. We have this financial way to support or encourage more inclusion, but we also have these design decisions in the program. And one of the main ways we're trying to make the program more inclusive is by introducing this blended mobility. So I say here that it's a tool for inclusion. It's not the only way to make the program more inclusive, but what blended mobility is offering is essentially this more flexible mobility format, allowing participants to go on a shorter physical mobility. In general, all mobilities that were previously only physical can now be blended. So blended mobility is an option not just for student mobility, but it's for studies. It's also for traineeship students, and it's also for staff for training and teaching. And we also have this new program that we call Blended Intensive Programs or BIPs, where at least 3 universities can come together and organize these intensive programs. So blended mobility can be organized within these BIPs or at a bilateral level. So for example, between universities, bilaterally, not having this group mobility, or like I mentioned, for traineeships. The goal here is to reach all types of students in all study fields and all cycles. So this is open for bachelor, master, and doctoral level students. And we are really hoping to reach student groups that were not mobile before. This can, for example, be students from study fields that are generally not very mobile. So if you have an institution that has trouble sending their nursing students abroad, for example, they can think of creating a blended intensive program with some of their partners that's specifically for students in nursing, because they want to give everyone this opportunity to have an international experience. So there are a lot of opportunities that blended mobility can be used for inclusion. And we would see it as a stepping stone to long-term mobility. We don't want all students with fewer opportunities to just be sent on a blended mobility. We also want them to have the opportunity to go on a long-term mobility, because we know from research that this is what really gives the students the most, going on this long-term mobility. But we want this, like I said, to be one of the tools that institutions have to improve inclusion in the program, and not have it replacing long-term physical mobilities. And we don't want to create some sort of second-class mobility that's only for students with fewer opportunities. But how are we going to achieve all this? Well, of course, we need to monitor how this is going. We have been working with a working group on ECHE monitoring. We are creating this new monitoring guide that will help the NAs support the higher education institutions and monitor them, of course, because in this Erasmus Charter for Higher Education, there are a lot of commitments to inclusion. So with the group, we decided to make inclusion a pressure point for the NAs to monitor and support. We will also be focusing on reports, the final participant reports for the feedback, and we will see if the program design and the financial support is really resulting in more inclusion in the program. So we will review what we have done and see if we're really achieving what we set out to achieve, and see where we can improve. And that's also where input from projects like this is very helpful. I think I will stop it here and just say thank you for inviting me, and good luck with the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much again, Svava, for sharing with us all these relevant insights about the definition of inclusion, how it is understood, and also about the participation of students with fewer opportunities. So even though we are a little bit behind the schedule, we have received a lot of questions in Slido, and probably also here you might want to ask some questions to Svava or other speakers, but Svava won't be able to stay with us for the rest of the event. So this is your chance if you would like to ask a question to her. If that is so, Liliana and Mariana have the microphones, so please raise your hand and they will be able to pass the micro. In the in-between, I would kindly ask you, Svava, if you could answer a couple of questions that we have received in Slido. So one of them concerns, so let me try to go for the first one for a kind of fairness criteria. So someone is asking, what was deemed as student from disadvantaged background to reach these conclusions for the 2014-2020 period?
Yes, I can answer that one. It was a top-up that not all the national agencies were using. So we just checked the number of participants who received this top-up. But now the top-up of fewer opportunities is used by all the national agencies.
Okay. Isn't the fact that criteria for fewer opportunities top-up defined at national level an issue in terms of communication and transparency for students? Someone asks.
Yes, it's a very good question, and it's something that we have heard from national agencies before, that this isn't maybe the most transparent way, but like I showed you on the slide, that it's the national contexts are very different. Some countries have more participants or more students that are migrants, for example, so it would make sense for them to have this criterion. There are other countries where a large amount of the student population is students who are parents or who have families. So for those, it would make sense to give the top-up to parents, while in other countries, few students are in higher education have families or have children. So it really depends on the national context, but we also want the program to be transparent. That's one of the key things that we focus on in this charter. So we ask the national agencies to define the criteria and to publish the criteria, to have it really available to students and institutions in their countries. And we also would like to see the higher education institutions themselves to have the criteria very clearly displayed on their website. But of course, if we have students coming to the same place with different backgrounds or different sending countries, of course, they will have different criteria that decide if they get the top-up or not. So it's a difficult balance, but we believe that like how we have approached it now is a good solution, and that's also what we've heard.
Okay. Is there any question in the room so that we can keep a balance between? Yes, Carl.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. Just a quick question. What exactly is the role of the inclusion officer at national level?
There is, at the NA, at the national agencies, they have inclusion officers. Maybe it would be more interesting for you to hear from a national agency on this. But they're not specific to one sector, so there's not necessarily an inclusion officer just for higher education, but for the program at other levels as well, so for schools and VET as well. So I couldn't give you a detailed explanation of what they do, but I'm sure there are colleagues in the audience who could describe better. But we also encourage institutions themselves to have inclusion officers to ease communication within the institution, like, for example, between the international office and student counseling and student registration. So I think the goal is for these inclusion officers is to promote the possibilities that the Erasmus program has to offer for students with fewer opportunities, and to ease communication between different offices and different levels.
Okay. Any other question? Otherwise, we can take maybe another one from Slido. So someone is asking, is travel support for students with fewer opportunities on short-term mobility possible for all students or just for those coming from outermost regions?
Yes, so travel support is available to students who are going on short-term mobility with fewer opportunities. So not just for students from outermost regions, those cities, it's for everyone.
Okay, and still someone asking, is the inclusion support for institutions available now?
Yes, it should be. It's in the program guides for Call 2021 and 22, so it should be available to everyone.
Okay, any other question in the room? You would like to ask Svava? Okay, so thank you very much once again for your participation, for having joined us, and for your interest in following our project. We really hope that we can make a good contribution. Sure. Okay.
Sorry, I wanted to type it, but it was too many characters. I was wondering about the support for the offices, which you counted with €100. And this seems to be very low for supporting a student before, during, and after, like a disabled student before, during, and after the mobility. And I was wondering if you gonna increase that number.
We will, of course, we will look into it. We will do a study on whether these support measures are adequate. But there's also the traditional organizational support, which was increased for the new program that's supposed to also cover a part of this. And maybe we can look at it more as an incentive for institutions, because yes, it can be a lot of work to support students throughout the whole process.
Okay, let me just update here the page because I think there were a couple of questions. So yes, we will be sharing the presentations. And just before going, so I think we have covered all the questions. There is here a question concerning the study presented by Svava. Was there distance education university?
I'm not sure what this is referring to.
I don't know if someone wants to rephrase the question so that we can understand clearly. If it was considered, maybe that is the question. If distance education was considered in the studies, maybe.
Well, most of what I was presenting.
Sorry, it was me. Yep. Who asked the question because I belong to a distance education university. Sorry. And so the question was the study considering any education institution, distance education institution, concerning the mobilities of students.
The results were just from every institution in the program, so we didn't make a distinction for universities there.
So, but did you get data from distance education universities?
Are you talking about the information from the past program?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, that was just all institutions that were participating in the Erasmus program. This Key Action 103.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like a university like ours, that is a distance education university, because we have the profile of our students is quite different. They are older students and they have already commitments, professional ones and familiar ones. So they are not at ease to take a mobility, long-term mobility. So with these opportunities that are possible now, it's better for them. Nevertheless, the grants and scholarships are not so good because sometimes they have to they cannot get their the amount they will receive from their job.
Mm.
Okay, and the accommodation is also very expensive outside. Would there be the possibility to consider working students as fewer opportunity students?
There are some national agencies that include that, but it's
okay.
like I said, it's defined at the national level. It's a collaboration between the national agency and the national authorities. So if they see that there is a need for this group of students to be represented or be included in the criteria, then they can do so. So maybe it would be interesting to take up the discussion at your next meeting with the national agency to see if maybe this is something that could be looked at.
Definitely, and also take the opportunity that we'll have one representative of our Portuguese national agency participating in the roundtable just right after the coffee break. So thank you again, Svava, for having joined us and for all these additional comments. Unfortunately, I cannot invite you, but I would like to invite all of those in this room for our coffee break. We are a little bit behind the schedule, but we will still keep the 30-minute break. So please, in 30 minutes, we will resume our event, okay? Thank you, and thank you, Svava, and all the
Thank you.
speakers. Okay, so welcome back to the second part of our multiplier event. I will now invite you to listen to our moderator and panelists of the roundtable, and also to take active part in the discussions afterwards. Please welcome again, as moderator of this roundtable, Carle Bonafous-Murat of France Universités.
Again, thank you very much, Hannah, and pleasure to be able to have been asked to monitor this roundtable. We have 4 speakers this morning, 2 sitting on each side of me and 2 online. So before getting started with the roundtable proper, I'd like to introduce those 4 speakers without further ado. So sitting to my left is Deborah Dore. Dore, how do you say it? It's
Dore.
Dore. Deborah Dore, who is a computer science master student at the University of Rome La Sapienza, and who is spending a semester at the University of Porto, thanks to Erasmus program for studies. So welcome, Deborah. Sitting to my right, there is Susanna Fragoso, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name properly, who works at the University of Porto, and she's in charge of the International Office and also Student Support Office of the Faculty of Sciences, and she's been involved in a lot of projects about inclusion and social responsibility. Thank you for joining us. Online, and I don't know if they're going to appear, there's Joao Paslar, how you who is from the European University Foundation and who is the coordinator of academic projects at the EUF. He's an expert in the field of the Bologna process, and he has coordinated efforts within the Erasmus Plus program, including the 500 Erasmus initiative. So nice seeing you or hearing you, Joao. And then last but not least, we have Gustavo Alba and Rosa, who works for the Erasmus Plus National Agency and who is in charge of inclusion at the Erasmus Mais agency, I think. Thank you for joining us also. And I think we can get started straight away because we've been dealing with quite a few issues already. And what are we going to do, if that all right with you? We will have a first round of questions, addressed to all our speakers online or in person, and then we'll exchange with the people online attending this event, and we'll do this, on and off, trying to alternate in that way. So this is a roundtable about the new opportunities and challenges of the 2021-2027 Erasmus Plus program. The program has been going on for, well, now almost 2 years. And of course, we had many expectations. Here are two guests whose faces I can now see. Hello, both of you. And there was a starting point which was slightly difficult, because I don't know if it happened in Portugal as well, but in France, some institutions, discovered at the very last minute that the amount of money that they expected had been lowered compared with the previous year, and so the program started with a few difficulties, which are of course related to issues of inclusions, and now perhaps I'd like to address questions more broadly to our participants, and the first question which I'd like to ask Deborah, well, of course, it's about your perception of the mobility you've undertaken. I guess that the very idea of going abroad on a mobility trip was something you wanted to do, but with a little hindsight, what were the factors that you took into account in order to choose to go abroad, and have there been differences between your expectations and your actual experience of the mobility now here in Porto?
So I start by saying that this was slightly a difficult decision, because in my country, Erasmus is not well seen among my colleagues. They think that they're going to lose time. And speaking about factors, one of the main factors that I thought that I was thinking about when deciding to do an Erasmus experience was actually losing time, because there's an Erasmus rule that says that if you're going on Erasmus, you cannot take exam at your own university, and due to different academic schedules, students may lose one or more session, and so most of my colleagues decide not to leave, so they don't lose the session at their own place and they can graduate sooner. So this one of the factors. Secondly, my university, and I think most of them, doesn't give the scholarship in advance, and so I had to pay for the first rent, the second rent, and the flight all by myself. And thankfully I could, but there are many students that cannot afford this, or they prefer not to do it. I hope it's not the same for every university. And the third factor was the bureaucracy, because in some university, it's very difficult to obtain the documents in a very short period of time. And therefore, many students prefer not to embark on this journey that it's collecting all the signatures and speaking to different coordinators in 2 different countries.
Thank you very much. So perhaps later on we'll have to assess whether it was worth it, going abroad in spite of having to collect all the signatures. Thank you very much anyway, Deborah. And now I'll turn to Susanna. Susanna, you know that inclusion and diversity is the first horizontal priority of the 2021-2027 Erasmus program. And of course, you've got a lot of experience in those issues, as I said earlier on. Do you see major differences between the former program and the current program? And how do you see the evolution? What is your first perception of those evolutions?
Well, can you hear me? Yes. No? Yes, okay, thank you. Well, yes, the new program was designed to be more inclusive, and I think that is evident. We have new topics for students with fewer opportunities and opportunity of blended mobilities. So this can allow more students to have opportunities of doing a mobility. I have been working into very different areas, the international and also the student support, mostly with the students with special needs and disabilities. So inclusion is, or these two areas allow me to see inclusion like a priority subject and an important part of the social responsibility. We have noticed also that there are increasing the projects in the area of inclusion and diversity, like this one that is happening today, the Uni for All, the cultural events, and also staff training weeks for those who work with the students and all this area. And this is very important to have good practices between universities. However, there are still many obstacles for those that want to do a mobility. And I think that accommodation and cost of living are biggest obstacles, and also the grants that are not so with so much money for all the expenses that students have out of our country. If I have just 1 minute, I can give you just a concrete example of a student that wasn't able to be included on Erasmus program. We have this student that is Cesar. He is a deaf-blind student, and his dream was to go abroad, to go to another country, to have the possibility of doing a mobility. And finally, June, he found it, the first European meeting for deaf-blind students. Unfortunately, he is not a PhD student, and it was not possible to give him short mobility grant because the program wasn't a blended program. It was a 10-day program, so it's short, but it was not possible to give them this kind of scholarship. In the end, went to Belgium. So the dream was done, and the accommodation was the big problem because for this meeting. Okay, sorry. Should I repeat everything? Okay, I think you understood that Cesar was a deaf-blind student, and his dream was to go to another country to have the opportunity to do a mobility. However, this program that he found was very important to him because it talks about leadership, discrimination, empowerment, but it was a 10-day program. So he was not a PhD student, and he couldn't be included on short mobility grants because it wasn't a blend mobility. In the end, he went to Belgium. The mobility was a success. However, here the obstacles were not the cost of living or the accommodation, because that was guaranteed, but Cesar needs a person to be with him 24 hours a day because of his meals, of the transportation, the space, the room space, and the translation, because he needs to have a tactile translation. So the money was a very, very big problem. In the end, with the help of University of Porto and his family, he went to Belgium. He was very brave. The mobility was a success, and we all missed the opportunity to have the first Erasmus student with deaf-blind students of Portugal, but that's it.
Thank you for this very telling example in all respects. Thank you very much. Moving on to Gustavo. Hello, Gustavo, working for the National Portuguese Erasmus Agency. We've been wondering, you know, inclusion and diversity are one of the main requirements of national agencies. And at the same time, national agencies such as the Portuguese one have got a lot of leeway in dealing with the means that they're given to, organize mobility. So how easy is this process of choosing whether to increase the number of individuals participating, or dealing with the grants slightly differently? How do you deal with this at the national agency? How do you deal with this inclusion and diversity issue?
Well, first of all, good morning, everybody. I would like to thank for this kind invitation from Universidade do Porto. Well, concerning the question, I would say, well, I would say I'm sure it is not an easy or a simple decision to be taken when we have to choose between increasing our national reference grants, for instance, for the program, or to involve more students within the program's activities. And this means that we always rely, or we always depend on the program's budget, since the program's budget, along with student families, are usually the main sources of funding. So what we do is we try to reach every year a balanced solution between the option or the strategy of every year increase the number of students participating in the program's activities. So we aim to involve more students every year, but also to increase the reference grant amounts whenever it is possible, whenever our budget, our national budget for the program allows it. But still, we do considerable efforts every year, since we have an overbooking policy. So we know that usually we cannot fully correspond or fully answer to our higher education institutions' ambitions or to the demand of our students when we talk about their objectives or the numbers involved in the program. So we have a demand which is much bigger than the offer we have. So what we try to do is we try to motivate our institutions by allowing them to develop their participation in the program, increasing their numbers, and whenever possible, we try to increase our reference grant amounts. Of course, ideally, every student should have a grant. But this leads us to other questions, since we talk about a program that is giving benefits to societies in general, for Europe in general, but still we remain with only two main sources of funding, which are the program budgets and also usually families. So well, it is not an easy option to be taken every year, but we still consider to be fairer to allow this opportunity of an Erasmus experience to more students, So we usually rely on that option. Together with our national authorities, of course, we opt for, in the first place, to guarantee that more students are involved, and whenever possible, we try to increase our national grants. I don't know if this somehow answers the question, but well, I would say this.
It does answer the question, although we can hear that it's not an easy answer at all, and that it's something that has to be decided again and again on a yearly basis almost.
Yes, yes, it is definitely, yeah.
Thank you. Joao, if you're with us, and I think you are, your organization, Joao, the European University Foundation, is very well known for its advocacy of a kind of baseline mobility grant, and you spearheaded the Erasmus 500 campaign, which was, I must say, quite successful. But judging from your perception of how the partners of this Erasmus for All project work together, how would you say do they respond? How do countries and organizations like yours, but others, respond to this desire for greater inclusion and for greater efficiency? How do you see, this evolution as at the end of the year 2022?
Thank you very much for having me, Carle. Thank you very much for the question. I hope that you can hear me all right. And good morning, bon dia to the colleagues in Porto, and good afternoon to the colleagues, most of them at least, that might be following us online. I think Deborah set the tone for this panel with a really direct and candid feedback. So let me see if I can try to follow in her footsteps. Gustavo was talking about the fact that we have two main vectors. We have the program budget and we have the family budget, which also plays a very important role in contributing to enable students to participate in mobility. I'm not going to talk about the family budgets and the efforts because we know that there is a glass ceiling of sorts there. So what I'm really interested in is the program budget and how we use it. And to be quite honest, I think we were a little bit disappointed that the new program essentially chose to continue what feels a relatively tired, sometimes inconsistent approach. I actually think that in the slides that Svava shared, to my impression at least, we can confirm that there is a certain stagnation in this attempt to increase participation in the program. And I think to me, it's very clear that it's not because Svava, Gustavo, the universities, other national agencies, the Commission, and any stakeholder are not trying very hard to improve participation. So let me work through some of the main components of the new program. So in short, blended mobility possibilities, very warmly welcomed. It's clear that they can be particularly important for some groups of students to whom participation would otherwise be more difficult. But it was already pointed, and I'd just like to underline, it's a great possibility. I think if we're being honest, we're still learning how to take maximum advantage of it. And I have no doubts that this is going to be a very fast learning curve for everyone involved, but not something that should come at the expense of long-term mobility, rather to complement it, or even to serve as a first step into that kind of experience. We talked about BIPs, blended intensive programs. Also very warmly welcomed, maybe not revolutionary, because in our opinion, they correct a mistake that was done in 2014 when the funding for summer and winter schools was no longer eligible. Of course, that BIPs have a different configuration and offer new perspectives, but it's very good to have them back in the funding landscape. Then we talked about green top-up, and here the UF and many other stakeholders and projects have been advocated we need to go much beyond the 50 euros approach that is currently in place. We need to be rather more ambitious, but like so many other things, it's a good first step in the right direction. It might just we might just need to consider whether it gets us where we want to be. And this allows me to finally come to the question of semester mobility. because this is where the steps that have been taken in 2021 don't seem to fundamentally affect what many universities have reported over the years, which is a certain bias in terms of social economic status and the ability to participate in mobility. Now, the question of disadvantaged students, I think, was very well discussed earlier. I think we're all on the same page, united in hoping to see tangible progress as we move forward. But there is the question of the student population at large that several of the research works that have been quoted keep shining a light on, and which I think is at the heart of this project. So there's a lot of room ahead of us for improvement. And I think we'll have to take some liberties in deconstructing what exists and being intellectually honest about what could work better. So all the core issues that colleagues mentioned in the introduction of the conference should indeed be a maximum priority for joint work. But let me just switch gears very quickly to conclude as well. It might seem that I'm talking of a glass half empty kind of situation. And this is partially how we feel when we look backwards. But what seems to be just as important, if not more important, is that I think there is a growing consensus in many of the questions, in many of the discussions that we participate, that we also try to stimulate, that we can and we must do more. So the focus really is on what kind of substantive changes can be introduced moving forward. Erasmus stands on the shoulders of giants. 45 years, what it has accomplished is not in question, and I think it will never be. But we want more. We want to take things to the next level. The fact that inclusion, participation are transversal priorities for the entire 7-year programming period is super important, because in one hand, they legitimize and make these discussions necessary. And on the other, I think it also propels the European Commission and other authorities, such as the national agencies here represented by Gustav, to work with the universities, to work with the students, to try to overcome this kind of systemic issues. So we can do better. That's the short answer.
Thank you for this optimistic conclusion. Thank you, Joao. Perhaps having had a first round of questions, we could take a few questions from people online, if that's all right with you. Do you have those questions available? Or we get on with the next round? Okay. Perhaps if we start with the second round of questions, I'll go the opposite way. I'll start with you, Joao, again. I saw something we mentioned that was mentioned earlier on in the few speeches that were given at the start, this ambitious objective of the 50% mobility target for European universities alliances. It's either, depending on who you are, very ambitious, quite difficult to achieve, or nigh to impossible to achieve. How do you feel about this? And how do you see the impact? How do you perceive the impact of those alliances on the mobility inclusion goal? How can they help in getting forward with the inclusion goal?
That's a fantastic question. Thank you so much, Carle. This is a topic that is very close to our heart. We see ourselves as having a responsibility to really make this a success, and European alliances have clearly a lot of potential to experiment with new ways to get to the results that we want to. So we are very optimistic that incredible things also with regards to participation and inclusion can come out of it. But actually, I would like to pick up on the 50% question goal that you correctly raised, because if I'm being very honest, I don't think that we collectively as a community of higher education practitioners and stakeholders are coping particularly well. Let me try to explain myself. So if we think about instruments and funding, I think we all in the room know of cases of alliances that, did the normal thing. They looked at the budget, at the resources they had, And they very quickly figured out that with this, the 50% mobility target was not a realistic target. Now, everyone signed contracts, everyone is under pressure to deliver. And naturally, this leads colleagues to think, okay, so I have a key performance indicator to reach, a KPI. So the only way I'm going to get closer to it is if I start counting online studies, or as you mentioned in the very beginning, as some colleagues like to call it, virtual mobility. I should do virtual mobility like this. So this is a problem. Svava, I think, hit the nail on the head, because she mentioned that we cannot afford to have first and second class mobilities. She mentioned this in the context of blended mobilities. I think it's even more obvious if we talk about internationalization at home activities. And on the other end, there's still, to my knowledge, at least from what I see in our work in the UF, a very large group of university leaders who would actually like, for the majority of this 50% mobility target, to be based on semester mobility or even year-long mobilities, which makes a lot of sense because European universities are supposed to showcase the very best of what the European education area has to offer. So it makes sense that we want the students that benefit from this to go through the best possible pathways relative to their circumstances. So when it's all said and done, it's very clear that we need greater investment to make these goals a reality. So for every hope that I have that the work that is being done in the alliances is going to be impactful, it's also clear that having better support systems will probably make the difference on how far we go. And I was also struck during the interventions before that in just a period of 2 years, we went from the president of the European Commission pleading for a 7 times increase of the investment in Erasmus to asking ourselves whether we can execute the resources that we have. Personally, I don't have the slightest doubt that if the funding and if the instruments through which we execute the funding are adapted to the needs of the students, also to the needs of the universities and European universities in particular, that we can deliver much more than what is possible. I think we can make progress towards this 50% goal. I think it would be important to preserve this 50% goal insofar that it sets the level of ambition of the entire initiative, but we have to make it fair. You cannot ask someone to play a game and then not give them the tools to succeed in that. So here there is an analogy between the situation universities find themselves, I think, to some extent at least, and the situation that some students find themselves wanting to participate, but not having the adequate tools to be able to do so.
Thank you very much. So the message is students should all have a first-class mobility, first class for everyone. And I think that's an important message that we have to reaffirm and again. And perhaps moving on to Gustavo again, on about the same issue, I'd like to have your view about one aspect, the fact that there are different groups for countries, depending on whether the living costs in some countries are apprehended. So there are different rates and different grant ranges. And that means that for students from the same background, for instance, there could be a difference in the amount of the grant from 1 to 2, for instance. One student from the same background as another could get twice as much as another one because the country where he or she is going is not in the same group. So how do you deal with this? Because this is clearly a major issue as regards inclusion, as regards the necessity of having, yes, first class mobility for everyone.
Well, thank you, Carle. This is a great question as well. I believe from my perspective, and I believe from the national agency's perspective, I would say that flexibility is an essential component when dealing with the management of these funds, of the Erasmus funds. We must be aware, we must notice that we are talking about 33 different program countries with different reference wages, with different living costs, with different approaches concerning the program's co-funding. So this means that we need flexibility. We will, even if we have two students with the same background, they will find different conditions when choosing different destination countries. Or maybe we will have involved within our program's activities, students with different capacities in financial terms. So this flexibility, in my opinion, is needed and allows national agencies and countries or institutions in general to to better adapt to its own reality in terms of universe of Erasmus students, or in terms of the regions they have to deal with. Still, this means that even if we only have 3 country groups, we can have several possible combinations in terms of sending and destination countries. So when the original information or the original instruction comes from the Commission, I believe it is best to have it like this. So in a flexible way, with a range in which each national agency or each country can decide to adopt it, or simply to define a fixed amount within this range, or within these 3 ranges we have. So in Portugal, the option is this last one. So since 2014, we have opted for a fixed amount for each country group when we talk about student mobility for studies, and consequently when we talk about student mobility for traineeships, since we consider this to be a more fair and a solution that will probably help to better mitigate the inequities coming from a range solution. So in national terms, I totally support, and we have this option implemented nowadays in Portugal. So the national agency and our national authorities consider to be a more fair solution, or a fairer solution, to have it like this, fixed amounts, so we can avoid situation as we had in the past, that 2 students coming from Portugal, if we have a range solution, we would have one of them would receive an amount that could be half of the other when compared when they would arrive to their destination. So I would say that we need flexibility, because we are 33 different countries, and then each country shall decide on what it's better concerning its national context, to have a range or a fixed amount. But that's what I would say. I don't know if this answers the question, but this is our view in the national agency.
Thank you very much, Gustavo. Thank you for a very clear answer. Thank you. Turning to Susanna again, it's the same question, but has seen from a slightly different perspective, because as we've just discussed, there are possibilities of for institutions, I mean, to give some students from disadvantaged background a top-up, for instance. This is something that is allowed by the Erasmus Plus program. But what about the role of governments themselves? Should they be responsible, for helping students from disadvantaged backgrounds to go on a mobility, thus allowing for more money from the Erasmus Plus program to be allotted to the students themselves. How do you see, judging from your experience, how do you see the role, the respective roles of the program, the government and the institution, because this is what it's all about. And it's Europe, you know, these issues of subsidiarity. What about the role of the government, for instance? How do you see this?
Well, this subject is not so familiar for me. It's more than central office, but I do believe that probably we need to improve the articulation when the top-ups are given, so that the available funding could be better allocated. This could allow more students to have the opportunity of doing mobility. With this, I don't mean that the government should pay the current top-ups. But in my opinion, when a need has been assessed during the Erasmus application, or it should be kept on that scope. But for universities, it's more of a burden to identify, select students with this background. So when it is a special need related to health, mental, physical, cultural, maybe it's better to submit to national agency for an individual analysis and decision, like it's done when the special need is related with disabilities.
Thank you very much. Thank you for a very clear answer. Thank you. Deborah, at the end of this second round of questions, perhaps I'd like to ask you one question which has been so broadly discussed, but would like to have your views about the issue of virtual mobility. And I began by saying that perhaps Joao wouldn't like me to use that phrase, but let's call it internationalization at home. Hello, Joao. No, but whatever the phrase, how do you feel and what can be the use of virtual mobility, if any, of course, from your point of view? Can it be an instrument which should be used, though moderately or not at all? How, with hindsight again, do you think you could have had the same experience by having a modicum of virtual mobility? I mean, we'd really like to have your views, because this is part of inclusion as well, we believe. So what do you think?
No. So I think it's a great opportunity for people who want to take it. In my opinion, I don't think it can be a really great asset, because the main reason of Erasmus is going to live abroad and experience a new culture, live every day that life. And if you do it at home, I mean, yeah, it can be great for people who want to maybe learn another language and follow courses in another language, but as a long-term solution, no, I don't really believe it's a very good way to experience Erasmus. I would prefer going physically in another country, as I did, and also after 2 years in which we were forced to follow lectures online, I don't think that many students would see this opportunity as life-changing.
Okay, that's a straightforward answer. Yeah, no, virtual mobility is not life-changing. Okay, well, remember that one.
Erasmus is that. Physical Erasmus is.
No, I understand your point very well. So thank you for this. How are we doing with time, Anna? Okay. Okay, so third and final round of questions to all speakers, and I'd like to ask each of you to answer in 3 minutes at most, right? This is the new challenge. And a for each of you. Deborah, do you think a more important amount would have changed your mobility, and if so, why and how?
Yes, it would have changed that because I spend all of my scholarship on the rent, and then with the rest I have still to pay for transportation and groceries, and so I have to omit something. Maybe an higher amount would have allowed me to do more cultural activities like going to the theater or doing sports, which I don't do because scholarship is not that high, unfortunately, and I have to think to something else before pleasure, let's say.
Hey, Susanna, we've been saying again and again. All right, yes. We've been saying again and again since the beginning of this morning that the main cost, the main burden for students is the cost of accommodation. Should it be transferred to universities? You've got 3 minutes to answer that one.
Okay, this is a tough question because the accommodation is one of the biggest challenges for those who want to study out of their parents' house or out of their country. It was perfect if you can guarantee the accommodation, but unfortunately, in Porto, for instance, we don't have enough places in university residence for all the students. And we are talking about national students, international students, and mobility students. We don't have enough places. And all the students have to look for private accommodation. And this is a big challenge for those that choose the more attractive cities because they have more difficulties. I don't think that is it's a big responsibility to have that question in universities, that responsibility in universities. I think if it happens, maybe the mobility decrease because it's impossible to have accommodation for all. Maybe we can give higher scholarship to have more options for all the students, but to have this responsibility with the universities, it's impossible, I think.
Okay, I remember the phrase, if you can hear me, accommodation for all. That's the next project. Gustavo, a brief question as well. One of the points that was made this morning and that was pointed out in the ESU survey, no, not in the ESU survey, sorry, by Professor Ricardo in his recommendations, is that perhaps we should move from a country-based grant to a city-based grant. But let's refine on that and assume that we could have a capital-based grant as opposed to a smaller city-based grant. What do you think? Would that be a good idea?
Thank you once again for your question, Carle. What I think is that I wouldn't say that I agree with that option, honestly. Unfortunately, the problems we are facing concerning accommodation, for instance, in capital cities or in the main cities of each country. In Portugal, for instance, we can easily refer to Lisbon or to Porto as having this problem of accommodation, as Susanna was saying. But in my opinion, this is a reflection of, or this reflects the political and economic configuration of each country. I myself feel that difference for living in Lisbon. So this is not a problem only affecting Erasmus students. It also affects population or resident students in general. So I prefer to see this issue as well, this is not a solution, of course, but maybe this should be viewed or seen as an opportunity for students to choose other cities than the main ones when they are doing or when they are choosing their destination for the Erasmus experience. Since, well, countries in general, Europe is much more than capital cities. So well, that leads us to the problem to the problem we have been discussing. We need more funds. Of course we do. We need more funds, but shall we request them only from the program's budget, or shall we see this program as a fundamental element for the European integration process, and assume that not only the European Commission, not only the institutions, not only some national, some public authorities should invest. Maybe we should see the investment or the contribution as a much more broad one. So I would say that, well, I don't agree with the view city by city or differing capital cities from the rest. I would prefer to see it as a country-based perspective. But I would say that maybe this is time for national authorities, whether we talk about local, regional, national authorities, to think about the relevance that internationalization of their own territories. How relevant is this internationalization? How interested are they in keep on receiving international students, allowing their local, regional, or national societies to improve and to develop themselves with these new and more broadened horizons? So I would say that maybe it is time to think of, for instance, when it comes to accommodation, to develop in a joint way, to develop to increase the offer they have, and this probably would allow students to have better options and to spend less money once the offer would be bigger. That's it. I didn't respect the 3 minutes, but that is it.
Doesn't matter, but two points you made. Europe is not the sum of its capitals. Good point. And secondly, how can local authorities, municipalities, regions benefit? How do they benefit from mobility? How does it affect their attractiveness? I think that's a very good point you made, Gustavo. Thank you. João, turning to you again. Now, just for the sake of hypothesis, let's imagine that, by the beginning of next multi-annual financial framework, the calculation methodology hasn't changed. Means that we have failed, A, and secondly, that, well, things are not going to be as inclusive as we would like them to be. How would you react to this? You at the head of an advocacy institution, what should we do to avoid this at all costs?
3 minutes for that question. Thank you so much, Carl. Let's see how far I can cover that. To be very blunt, if we don't really try to rethink the current approach to student support, what I would say is that instead of an evolution of the program, we could face a regression of our ability to make sure that the participation is as diverse as we would like it to. It's very simple. And these are matters of fact. We have obviously the living cost crisis. We have in many countries an increase of students that must work in order to fund their studies. And we have, of course, the problem of accommodation that we already touched upon several times. And in many ways, I sympathize a lot with what Gustavo was just saying. I mean, if these are structural issues. They do require fundamental reckoning from the part of national authorities. But I'm also afraid, and I'm trying to remain pragmatic, I'm also afraid that if we put our eggs in the basket of expecting decisive action to be taken across all of the program countries in a manner that affects change, that we're going to be waiting for a relatively long time. To some extent, the authorities have spoken by allowing some situations in terms of affordability of accommodation and notably the availability of dorms to get to the point we're at. I think that's a fight worth fighting for, because clearly, also from an economical standpoint, it would be very much more efficient if we can provide that kind of support in kind than if we have to actually cost what are rapidly increasing accommodation costs with a living cost difference. But I don't feel that most organizations that do advocacy stand a particularly good chance to win that battle in a very assertive way. And so I'm still rather focused when I look at on trying to figure out, notably with the support of projects such as this one, can we be smarter? Can we be more effective? Can we be more inclusive with the kind of support that we offer students? And here, I mean, we're amongst colleagues in academia, so I think we can afford to throw things in the air and think a little bit outside of the box, as long as we're trying to experiment and understand what works, what doesn't. It was noted that flexibility is very important, but I would put as well to the colleagues, and in the spirit of healthy discussion, we have reached as well some situations, and there were examples of this in the Erasmus 500 campaign that you mentioned earlier, where the fact that, and this is not at all questioning the importance of subsidiarity, obviously, but the fact that different countries do their very best to do, what they can for their students leaves us in paradoxical situations. Gustavo already mentioned a good example of, mistakes we can avoid. Students going from the same city, maybe the same institution, or the same city, let's put it like that, to a similar destination that arrive there with different grants. We need to make this student support system simpler, more intelligible for students. Ricardo mentioned the question of information, of feeling confident that they can afford to participate. I think that there's a lot of room for improvement. And I think that, to come back to your question, we cannot afford to fail. This is relatively existential if we want mobility to become a reality for an ever larger part of our European young adult population.
Thank you for your very clear answer. And I'll relate part of you said to what Susanna said. You said we ought to make students feel more confident that they can do it. This was, I think you used the word confident. I think that's very important, something that Deborah pointed out. But you, Susanna, also said that students should be empowered. I remember you saying something like this at some point. So let's remember this, that's also part of the issue, costs, grants, but also confidence and trust. Just a message to round up those 3 rounds of questions. And now, if we have a little time left, we could take a question from the audience, of course, and questions from people attending online. I'm sure there are quite a few. And perhaps from the audience to begin with. Okay. While people are getting their questions ready in the audience, I'll take one from Slido, the one for Deborah. Deborah, what would be a way to improve students' perceptions of Erasmus Plus mobility? Perhaps echoing what you said at the start, that among your fellow students,
Yes.
There is not so much desire to go abroad. So I suppose that's something that is part of the question here.
I think a very good way to improve the perception will be if companies, when students search work, will value more Erasmus or any other experience abroad instead of just not saying anything about it, because my perception is that when I searched for work last year and they saw my curriculum, nobody asked me, oh, you did these experiences abroad, because this is not my first Erasmus. So I already had 2 experiences abroad, but nobody cared. And so, I mean, what's the point in doing that if it's not recognized after? It's just for you at the end. So I think a very good way will be if companies will also look at that, but also I think in the university, if some points were awarded to students who did the Erasmus, it would be a nice starting point.
Thank you for that clear answer as well. I can't see the slide of questions anymore, but yes, questions from the audience. Okay, yeah, thank you. Oops, I have to take my glasses out. Sorry about this. Oh, yeah, thank you. Thank you. There's one for Gustavo. Starting again from the assumption that students would not choose capitals, will it then have a negative impact on the internationalization policy of higher education institutions in capitals? A good dialectical point, is it that important for HEIs in capitals to have a strong international policy? And if they're not chosen anymore, how would that affect their own policy? Gustavo?
Well, thank you. Well, I think that would be an extreme scenario, of course. I was not trying to say, or I was not saying that capitals should be avoided, or that it should not be as much valid destination as any other city. What I was trying to explain is that a student, whenever it comes the time to make a decision, some details or some characteristics of the destination he is about to choose, he or she are about to choose. Well, one thing should be to be aware that usually in biggest cities, depending on the country they choose, maybe the accommodation offer will not be as cheap as in other places. So this is a sort of an element to be taken into consideration whenever a student chooses. Of course, it is much more, I would say, easy to find cultural options, to find transportation, to find accommodation options in terms of quantity. When we choose a capital city, probably we will find more infrastructures and more alternatives, but still we are dealing with serious problems concerning this issue, at least in Portugal, at least in Lisboa and Porto and maybe Coimbra. I do not know in detail, but this means that we will have to face it, or still we have alternatives in terms of destination. So the impact in capital cities, I would not see it like that. I would invert the question made. So I would say, does the fact of students choosing capital cities have negative impacts in all the other cities participating within the program? So this is, this is a manichaeistic scenario. I would not put it like that. So I don't know if this is clear or not, but that is my view.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was an easy question. Thank you, Gustavo. Yes, there's a question from the audience. Over there, there are 2 questions. And there's another one also at the back. There are 2 questions at the front.
Hello there. Can I be heard? Okay. I'm Oliver Vavra from Comenius University in Bratislava, so I'm the regular participant of this International Week. And I might have a general question. We've mentioned the possible role of the municipalities when it comes to some kind of additional funds for receiving international students, because they get some income when receiving international students, for they stay here or there, and yeah, they spend some money and stuff here. So do you think that this is the right time for example, European Commission or their stakeholders to somehow push on the municipalities for opening the questions of extra funding of those international students? Because this is also the thing which we as a Erasmus coordinators need to describe when it comes to filling in the final reports of our Erasmus Plus project. I mean the possible internationalization when it comes to national or regional level. So it might be taken into account.
Thank you very much. So that's a question which is interesting and in keeping, yes, with what we've been saying, you know, contemplating the question from the European perspective, the national perspective, the regional perspective, and now the local perspective, the perspective of municipalities. Should municipalities, you know, be requested to contribute to covering the costs of mobility? What is their role? People from Porto, our colleague is from Bratislava, I understand, but people from Porto might want to bring their contribution. Gustavo, perhaps, I'm afraid this might be another one for you, but everyone else can join in.
Well, thank you, Carle. I'm not sure about being the best person to answer this, but the way I see it is that municipalities or local authorities, they are supposed to, well, to improve their inhabitants' life conditions, or to answer the most relevant needs they find. So if we talk about a municipality that has well, a relevant participation within programs, activities, that knows that the students coming from that municipality or that region usually do not have the economic conditions, maybe this could be a priority to be considered, since they are interested in better training and better educating their own citizens, and we hoping they will come back one day better prepared for a labor market, better prepared to be entrepreneurs or to develop the region. So this is a sort of viewing it as an investment in people. So and I believe investing in people is one of the main priorities for these 7 years for Europe. So this is already seen in some places, because probably it's not probably, it's certain in certain countries we have regional grants, we have co-funding coming from national budgets. So this is already an option in certain cases. It depends on the priority each municipality shall have. But of course, maybe stakeholders, local stakeholders, maybe the education and training agents within each region should pressure on, should probably bring this to the agenda when dealing with their local authorities. But this is only my view. This is not an official position from a national agency. That's it.
Thank you. Just a piece of information in keeping with this. Currently, there is a project of creating an association of European university cities, which was started a few months ago in Brussels, just for the sake of saying that this is an issue which more and more municipalities in France, certainly, but elsewhere, are finding important. So thank you. We have time to have 2 more questions. There's one coming from the audience again.
Hello, my name is Veronika Merklein. I'm from the University of Applied Arts in Vienna. And I think my question fits perfectly well with the question beforehand, because I not only see that students need more money and support when they go abroad, like multi-complex students, but I also see that we need more training in the international offices and also as well in the faculties, because I'm also supporting disabled students, and I see there's a lot of lacking and overwhelmed faculties. So I was wondering what your opinion is on that.
Okay, so our colleague from Vienna, from another capital, is asking, how could students be better prepared in a way? This issue of preparation by international offices, that what?
No, not really the students, but how could the staff be better prepared
better supported
to support the students?
Okay.
Because often I see that they even don't understand the differences between equality and equity and so on and so on. So often they just have no training on that. And then we're now facing a more multi-complex student group.
Okay, perhaps that's a question for you, Susanna. At the University of Porto, do you do something for staff in order to, well, get them better prepared in order to cope with all sorts of situations, all sorts of all kinds of students wanting to go abroad? What do you do? And perhaps other people from other universities can share their answers with us.
Okay, as I was saying on the first question, I have noticed that, or we have noticed that we have an increase of cultural events, projects in this area, diversity and inclusion, and also the staff trainings in these two very important topics. Because it's very important to share good practices between all the universities, all the office. I work in two different areas, so this topic is not a new thing for me. But for the people who work only on international office, I think they should have more staff trainings about this inclusion and diversity. So I can, in University of Porto, we have the opportunity to do staff trainings in other countries, of course, but maybe this kind of topic should be more
center stage.
Yes.
Center stage, yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, I think we have time for one final question, which could come either from the audience or from people online. I don't know, is there one? Is there a question? Yes? Okay. Don't know. Can we have the Slido? Yes. Slido slides. The one at the top. Administrative procedures are already a burden for institutions. How to include more students, introduce new schemes, and at the same time reduce bureaucracy, echoing one of the words used by Deborah at the start. So who would want to answer that one? More students and less bureaucracy. Wow.
It should be a dream.
João?
Thank you. I cannot promise to answer the question, but I really, really like the question, so I also voted for it. I just wanted to make a remark also for the sake of discussion, particularly for the colleagues that can continue these discussions face-to-face in Porto. I think the point that a colleague makes in the Slido question is symmetric with the questions about clarity and transparency of grants. Grants are made complicated to calculate. And when that's or rather, if grants are made complicated to calculate, they're also made complicated to explain to their beneficiaries. So to give you a very practical example, in the discussions leading up to 2021, there were some proponents, myself included, of whether we should consider the usage of lump sum grants, which we know from the program architecture are relatively easy to work with, to report, and also to communicate about. There were good reasons why we didn't went in that direction, I believe. It's not an easy decision to make. But there are still discussions underway about, for example, universities that have decided not to rely on certificates of arrival and departure to implement and confirm the grant calculation. So in short, it should be possible to have a better grant system that doesn't tax the international relations officers in terms of the work they have to do to carry out with paperwork. And paperwork is something that I think many colleagues in the room would love to decrease, if not to eradicate to the extent possible. So I'm a firm believer that good criteria, logic, transparent, rooted in data can lead to automatisms in terms of calculation of the grants. And hopefully this would be a way that would benefit both the students and the community that makes Erasmus possible by working every day in making sure that paperwork, the red tape, the contracts, the grants, everything is in perfect working order. So simplification is definitely the word there.
Thank you very much, Raul, for reminding us also that Erasmus is a program that necessitates the work of people on an everyday basis, which is important. This was also one of the implications of the previous question. So on that, I think we're going to close this roundtable. I'd like to thank all four speakers, Deborah, Susanna, Gustavo, and Joa for their participation and their very valuable contributions. Thank you to you all. There were about 120 people attending online. That's a great success. Thank you very much. And now on for the closing remarks. Thank you very much. No, not yet. Sorry about that.
Still two speakers to go. Thank you, Carl, and all the speakers for this interesting debate of ideas. So, as we have shared previously, a part of the work carried out by the Erasmus for All partnership in the first phase of the project consisted in mapping and analyzing other funded mobility programs in order to understand how these grants are calculated and eventually what can we in the Erasmus Plus program learn from them. To share a bit of the conclusions of this work, I will invite our colleague Brandon Tighe from Trinity College Dublin.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, Brandon.
Okay,
Just
perfect.
a short, okay, now you are on the screen. Hello. Thank you.
Thank you. Firstly, just let me start by saying that I regret that I can't be with you today in Porto. I'm calling in from Dublin today and really jealous of the lively discussion that you've just had. I found that very, very interesting. I'm going to try and be really brief with my slides so that we can stay on time and present you the conclusions of the mapping.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay. So this presentation, again, I'll keep it really brief, is about the insights and lessons learned from the different funding models out there that we examined. And the exercise involved colleagues from the different partner universities and the international offices looking and conducting searches, finding information about different funded mobility programs across Europe and across the world, in conjunction with some scientific desk research, which was done by academic colleagues from our universities. There were three main steps to this exercise. The first was the identification and mapping of such programs. The second was to explain how those scholarships were awarded to participants. And the third step involved analyzing the various methodologies and the relationship to participant satisfaction. And here you have some of those that we identified, but in total, we studied 19 funding programs apart from Erasmus. The analysis itself compared Erasmus Plus to these programs on these various features. So the first one being financed. How are they funded? Where does the money actually come from? Who are the target participants? Students, staff, students from different groups, disadvantaged background, and so on. How long is the scholarship granted for? So the duration. How much is the scholarship for? So the amount. What are the eligibility criteria? So who can actually apply for this grant? Then the application process itself, what does that look like? What are the forms that need to be completed and so on? How is the actual scholarship amount calculated? How do they select which participants will be awarded a grant and who won't receive a grant, or perhaps who will receive a top-up, that kind of thing? What are the eligible costs? So again, some of the grants that we studied don't have set amounts. They instead look at the student or the staff member's costs and try to match those. Then whether or not the scholarships are compatible with other scholarships, so students can be doubly funded, for instance. And then lastly, the conditions for termination. So in what circumstances can the scholarships be cancelled? So straight into the conclusions, I would say here that this is probably the largest and most important conclusion, and probably to echo something that João just said. In terms of scale, there's no comparison to the Erasmus Mobility Programme, which delivers hundreds of thousands of grants per year, whereas some of those that we reviewed are much, much smaller in scale, sometimes ranging from as low as 2 awards to about 150 awards annually. So really, in some senses, Erasmus is the only game in town, and it's really important that we make a success of it. So the duration, the first feature that we analysed, the shortest non-Erasmus program that we looked at awarded funding for as little as 4 weeks, and then the longest was up to 2 years, with the average being 6 to 9 months, so a semester or a full year of studies. So broadly speaking, in line with Erasmus there. With regards to the application process, there are generally only 2 ways of going about that. It's either managed by the higher education institution or by the external third party who's financing the grant itself. So, you know, in today's modern age, generally these are online applications, though it is worth noting that some do include an interview, for instance, with the Tighe Foundation. What about eligibility criteria? Well, several, if not almost all, of the programs do look at things like language proficiency, the level or a year of enrollment in the degree, the location of the student and where the student will be studying, whether or not there'll be recognition of credits obtained at the host university. Nationality and residency, of course, do come into it quite a bit, as do age, the area of study and expertise, and whether or not students are in receipt of other grants. Only one of the 19 scholarships that we reviewed actually require students to meet certain socioeconomic conditions to be permitted to apply, which is the Aide Mobilité Internationale Étudiante financed by the French government. Following on with our conclusions, in terms of selection criteria, academic performance, project relevance, students' motivation, references, typical things that you might find in sort of any kind of student application, extracurricular activity and so on, are taken into account in many of the 19, but it's worth noting that 4 out of the 19 programs do consider socioeconomic factors in their selection criteria. So for some of those socioeconomic factors are determined at the national level, others it's determined by the university, and so on. So really there's a diversity of practice in that area, but what's worth noting here is with the Bolsas Pro Cultura, for this scholarship, selection is made based on quotas. So there's an equal distribution of gender, origin, country, culture, and so on. So only one other program worth mentioning here would be the study of US Institutes for Student Leaders, the Fulbright Portugal program, and it does take into account students' previous travel experience and prioritizes students who have not yet had any opportunity to travel abroad. So more or less, I guess you could say, based on selection criteria, that socioeconomic factors don't always come into play, but that they can be quite innovatively used to prioritize some students. Scholarship calculation and distribution. The conclusions we made here are that there are a few trends that can actually be seen. Some programs provide a lump sum of a fixed amount for everyone, regardless of where they're going and that kind of thing. Others provide that in monthly installments, but some scholarships cover travel, others only a monthly stipend that varies depending on host country, similar to the Erasmus program, but the majority do not require students to report on their spending. However, there are some scholarships that cover specific costs that students report, such as their travel costs, tuition fees, and housing. So lastly, in terms of the economic factors used in calculation, the three scholarships where the funds vary depending on the economic status of the student were the Trinity Global Mobility Bursary. And in this instance, students who are recipients of Irish government student grants, known as SUSI, receive top-ups from Trinity's own funds to take part in a non-European mobility. The Fondo Giovanni grant issues a top-up based on students' economic situation. In that case, the top-up is divided into three categories based on the student's family income. So that information has to be made available in order to calculate that. And likewise, the Bologna Overseas program is a monthly contribution cost that is set at 5 fixed rates. And that is adjusted based on the family's income, with students in the lowest family income bracket receiving more than double those in the highest bracket. For a lot of the programs that we sampled, they are similar to the Erasmus program in that destination is used in the calculation of the grant amount. So for example, Nord Plus has 3 different rates for the travel costs based on countries traveled from and to. However, in their case, the monthly stipend offered is actually the same, regardless of the destination. For La Caixa Foundation, there are 3 monthly allowances based on destination. So the European higher education area, Asia Pacific, and North America all have different rates. And then the Fondo Giovanni program has 3 different monthly allowances based on destination location, ranked by high, medium, and low cost of living countries. So again, broadly similar to Erasmus Plus in that instance. So the last conclusion to be drawn about the comparison between these scholarship programs and the Erasmus Plus program is that for the majority, termination can occur if students do not comply with their contract or force majeure. So for example, with the Bologna Overseas program, students must spend at least 3 months at the partner university or on a 1 semester exchange, or at least 8 months on a full year exchange. And if they fail to do so, then they'll have to pay back the contribution, the funds that they received. And students also have to complete at least 1 transferable learning activity per semester. So really, I guess the conclusion that I would make or draw based on this comparison of the funding programs is to go back to what I initially started with, that in some respects Erasmus is the only show in town, and I think it is demonstrated actually by the difficulty in identifying additional funding programs to study, the lack of information out there about those, and how sometimes the information is kept very private by the third-party organizers and financiers, or by the universities providing the funding. So with Erasmus, we are able to see that it's the program that we need to make the best of in order to address inclusivity and make Erasmus for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brandon, for sharing these conclusions. So you will be able to find more detailed information about these mapping and analysis in the Mapping and Research report, which will soon be available, as we mentioned before. And with this, we are leading into the last point of our agenda today, through which we will provide a deeper look into the next steps of our project. For that, I invite Helena Alves, Policy and Research Officer of the European University Foundation, to tell us a little bit about what's ahead. Helena, please take the floor now.
Thank you. Hello, and hello to everyone following us online or at the University of Porto. Let me know if you can see my screen, please.
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, good. Okay, let me just move this. So to end our event, we wanted to give you a sneak peek into the work that we still have ahead in the Erasmus for All project. So that's what I'm going to tell you now. What? So, as Luísa said in our the beginning of this event, we have four main results of the Erasmus for All project: the mapping and research report that Brendan just presented the preliminary conclusions, and then the guidelines for a more inclusive grant calculation formula is the result that we are working right now, and it will include the new grant calculation methodology from the Erasmus for All consortium. Then we will have the Erasmus for All impact study and recommendations towards a more social and economically inclusive Erasmus scholarship. But the task to reach a more inclusive grant calculation formula is quite big. So how would we reach that? We have several things that we'll use. And the first one would be to understand what was done and what needs to change. So we will base ourselves in the results of the mapping and research report and understand what has been done not only in the Erasmus grant calculation, but also in other scholarship schemes, and also look into the research that has been done in the topic that showcases what are the biggest deterrents for mobility for students and what needs to change to make Erasmus mobility more appealing to them and really truly make it for all students. And to work on this, we also wanted to have different perspectives from different areas of expertise. So that's why we have a group of experts working with us from our member universities that have different topics of expertise, mainly economics, sociology, and statistics. And we also have the policy experts on the consortium, inside the consortium in our members, that will bring the policy aspect to the discussion. After we reach a proposal for a more inclusive grant calculation formula, we will also look into it in detail and analyze its positive aspects and shortcomings, and also listen to other stakeholders outside the consortium to see what they think about it and what are their views on it, and see how we could integrate their comments into the final scenario that we will create. In this process, the first test that we have developed so far is the Roundtable. That was an internal discussion for the consortium that wanted to start the development and bring some shared assumptions to the table. We started by characterizing the European higher education student population, because those are the actual target groups of the Erasmus for All scholarship scenario. And we also looked into the current Erasmus grant, the shortcomings that exist, and other proposals that have been already launched into making the Erasmus methodology, the grant methodology, more inclusive. And then we deep dived into topics of interest for this new methodology. One of them, and one of the main conclusions that we reached in the discussion, was also previously mentioned by Ricardo, and also in the roundtable it was also a topic of discussion, which was basically the cost of living differences within the same country. Even if the student goes to both students go to the same country, they might have completely different experiences based on the cost of living of that particular city And since the grant, the current Erasmus grant is only based on the actual country. So that is something that was brought to the table. And of course, the topic of accommodation was also something that was a big focus of our discussion and a big issue that might need to be tackled in the future. So, and what's to come in the Erasmus for All grant methodology creation? So basically, so far, we reached the shared assumptions, and we want to create as many hypotheses for this new methodology as possible, so that we have all the possibilities in the table. We can be as creative as we want to, and afterwards we will size it down and understand what are the best ones, the best methodologies, taking into account not only the views of the consortium that has stakeholders from different fields of expertise, universities, student associations, and also policy level expertise, but also here students and here other stakeholders, as we said previously. After that, we will have the iteration and testing. We will have a small case study that will be probably developed in the 2023-2024 academic year, in which we will compare two groups of students, one that will be using the current Erasmus grant, and another one that will be using the Erasmus for All new grant methodology that we'll be creating. And we will, those conclusions will be major and will be very important for the final results of the project. Afterwards, so we will have the public presentation of results, and that links us to the next part. So the final result of the project would be the recommendations towards a more social and economically inclusive Erasmus scholarship. This final project result will be also in time for the midterm review of the Erasmus Plus program, which we hope will bring some new insights into what can be done, and will hopefully bring some change into the way the Erasmus scholarship is calculated and worked on. And yeah, fingers crossed for that. But I hope I enticed you with the results of the project and the work that we have so far. So we wanted to invite you to stay tuned and to show your support to making the Erasmus Plus program truly for all students. So if you want to check our website and our social media, we will be happy to hear all your contributions and comments. And yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. And back to you, Joana.
Thank you. Thank you, Helena, for this so clear and concise presentation. And with this sneak peek into the work ahead, we come to the end of our event. So again, also wanted to remind you to continue following on the updates through our official website and social networks. And on behalf of our partnership, I would like once again to thank you all for having joined us today and for caring for an even more inclusive Erasmus program. So that's it from today from us. Let's make of Erasmus an Erasmus for all. Thank you very much.